teaching the horse from the ground what you're going to do in the saddle. All right? And this is really, really helpful because it's easy when we get on a horse to get distracted by the horse. But when you're on the ground, you can focus a little bit more on the process that you're working on. But most everything that you do in constructive teaching on the ground is transmitted to the saddle. Even in the case of lunging, it's a lunging lesson on a long line. The way that all the commands that take place in that process of lunging should be able to be duplicated by the rider in the saddle. And it gives another perspective, I think, if you look at it that way. If you do start to lunge your horse or teach your horse to lunge, is recognize everything that you're doing on the ground. There should be some way that you duplicate that from the saddle. And a lot of times when you're doing things on the ground, you have the observation of the decisions because you're on the ground, and in the saddle you have the feeling of the decisions. Now, as we get into this lesson today, what the whole process of teaching your horse, or recognizing the response of your horse, is for the rider to study the muscles of the horse, the muscle decisions. A muscle decision will formulate before the feet actually move. You'll be able to see what your horse is going to do before he does it. And this is where your timing automatically starts to get better and better and better. Move that hand over the shoulder, over the shoulder, over the shoulder. That's all it goes. Just like that creates the turn. And let me change reins, shorten up. My left hand's controlling my right rein. And what I'd like to see you do is get comfortable with changing your location on your rein, changing your hands on your reins. It happens so often, and once a rider gets hold of the rein, they start trying to get a shorter rein with a longer arm, just because they feel like I've got a hold of it, and now the horse is doing something, and pretty soon they'll find themselves in awkward positions, and where your rein should be flowing literally through your hands constantly as you're riding. Your hand should really never stop changing location on the rein, because your horse's head is always changing its position. And if your hands are working with the change of the position, then you're always in the right position with the horse. We have a lesson where if you pick up a rein and make contact, it's to drop the head. And you teach that on both sides, but then sometimes after you teach that, now this happens. and you have a Western pleasure horse, but the horse starts dropping it because they feel the contact on the bit. They start dropping their head further and further. And then if it's going too deep, what your rider will do is just be stationary, and they'll push, and then they'll come back, and that's where you release. So you can actually tell the horse where you want to leave its head, when you're riding it. Does anybody have any questions?
Yep.
Okay.
Why is Belle doing this?
Well, Belle first off has an umbilical cord to her mate that is back at the ranch, and she has never had any separation really, and so this is a kind of a new experience for her. But this is great for a horse like this, just to hang out. And I didn't bring this up to everybody as I introduced people, and it looks like everybody is pretty much doing it, but we all want to wrap your lines. Don't tie a knot on anything when you're tying your horse on anything, because I'd rather have your horse get away than get in trouble. So it's always just a wrap of the rope. Yeah, you can just take the rope all the way off and just bring her head with you. She'll probably step right out of it. You get quite a ways away from her when you do it.
Forward. Yeah. Forward. Forward.
There you go. There you go. Okay, now just to enter into a couple of other things here. When we talk about fine feel and response, when the rider searches, the rider brings their leg to the horse, if you are resting on your ball of your feet, not forcing your heels down or your toes up, and then you just come in with your leg to find the horse right there with your calf. So you find with your calf, and that's what drives the decision of the horse. It's referred to as the contact, and all of you have heard the term ride in contact if you've ridden English. And I've heard it many times where an instructor will talking to the student and more contact, more contact. Well, you can't have more contact. You either have contact or you don't. But you can add more pressure. And so if the rider is starting to get instructed where they need more, the instructor says more pressure, then the next question the rider may be thinking, well, how much? You know, where do you draw the line? What does that mean? So this is where if you get into the fine feel and response where you're finding the horse, you know, so if you pick up the reins and you're going to find, there I just found her mouth. There's a decision from the horse. I wait for the decision, you don't insist on it. If I start to bring my leg in and to find the horse, right there I found the energy in the horse. And it's the calf, not the ankle. If you think about the way your leg is built, your calf is going to find the horse before your ankle does. So that means that it should be a pretty easy place to teach from. And if you know, just like we're coming into the fly season now, you notice a fly will land on your horse, and a lot of times the horse will move that muscle to get rid of that fly. So the fly can move a horse, so we ought to think a little bit about, at least try to discipline ourselves on when we're speaking about leg yields and that sort of thing, what we're actually speaking of. So we don't always feel like, a lot of times a rider will wear spurs, and there's not a thing wrong with wearing spurs, providing they're used as they were intended, pretty much for lateral work. But unfortunately, a lot of times things like spurs become a kind of a crutch. You almost feel like I need to have my spurs. Or they'll identify a horse as that horse needs to have spurs to get it to go. No, the horse needs to be educated between its ears. So, any questions you can think of? No questions? Okay, well, either you guys are ready to go or you're just bored to death.